Welcome back to another Post Media Senators panel. I'm Bruce Garrioch, pleased to be joined today by TSN hockey insider Darren Dreger. And Darren, as we speak today, the Senators are sitting outside of a playoff spot for the first time in 6 weeks, but they are also in the throes of a four-game losing streak as the Winnipeg Jets arrive in town. I still think this is a playoff team.
Yeah.
I wondered let's start with the Senators. I just wonder what your feelings are on that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I look at Ottawa as being a playoff team, and I know the fan base doesn't need to be reminded of everything that this organization has gone through over the past number of years to get to a place where, clearly they've turned a corner here. A bit of bad luck, not to make excuses, because every team goes through injuries. But you look at the pieces that aren't in the lineup for the Ottawa Senators, and that helps explain, this recent setback, if you will. I'm not going to call it a skid yet. It's too early for that. But I do think, and I know you're going to want to talk about this, but I do think that there's value, especially with the remaining games of the regular season, in making sure you're as healthy as you can be, because the games only get more difficult as you creep closer to, the finish line. So, nights like last night, as we're recording here on Wednesday. So Tuesday night, sure, that can be challenging, right? You're not playing. You've got the Winnipeg Jets sitting there waiting.
You're watching everybody pass.
And you're watching all the teams that you're in the mix against in the Eastern Conference. When Boston against Toronto had that game in hand until they didn't in the third period. Tuesday was a wild one in terms of the jockeying for position for those final wild card spots. And Bruce, it kind of feels like that's the way it's going to be, maybe to game 82 of the regular season, but when healthy. And I think that's what Ottawa is most focused on right now, giving these players the time that they need. And it can be just a day or two extra. We're not talking about weeks. We're talking about a day or two extra to get this group as healthy as they can be, because the heavier lifting is right around the corner.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that has been talked about is that they will get Josh Norris back against the Jets. I would assume that perhaps Brady Tkachuk and Shane Pinto play on Saturday against the San Jose Sharks. Certainly, if not then, by I think they play Monday against Washington Capitals. So I look at it, Darren, and Brady Tkachuk made a point yesterday that a 50% Brady Tkachuk isn't going to be able to help this team, and that this isn't something that he wants nagging him for the last 24 to 25 games.
Right.
So take care of it now, right?
Yeah, I'm fully on board with that. And you have to manage players like Brady as well. Some players, they're just not comfortable playing no matter what their percentage is below 100%. I know that sounds extreme, especially when you're at the point of the regular season we're at. Brady is not that player. He knows as captain of the Ottawa Senators that he's got a role to play. He's got a responsibility to do everything he can to drag this team into the playoffs. So at 50%, would he strap up and go? Of course he would. But management can't allow that. The medical people can't allow that. And Travis Green definitely doesn't want to do that, right? But you're talking about the character and the spirit of a guy who's just a gamer. But he does need to be at a higher percentage to be as effective as he can be. There's a physical side to Brady's game, which we saw front and center at the Four Nations. And I'm not talking about the fighting. I'm talking about, the paying the price, the physicality, the hitting, all of that, going to the net where we're accustomed to seeing Brady Tkachuk go on a regular basis. Those are compliments to his game that also go along with scoring big and timely goals. So that's what they need from him. So again, if it takes another game, maybe two, for him to get to that place where he can do all of those things, and that means that the Ottawa Senators are in better shape.
Well, and I look at it, and there's a lot of debate here on whether he should have played Darren in the final game. Yeah. I'm of two minds on it. I'm like, okay, well, he missed Saturday's game, so should he have played in the final game? But part of me is like, he needs that experience. Yeah. And he raised his game. I thought what we saw was a preview of what we'd see from Brady Tkachuk in the playoffs. How did you feel about him playing in that final game? I like I say, I'm of two minds. In the end, I think it was better for him to get the experience.
I would agree with that. How do you keep Brady and Matthew Tkachuk out of that game? I mean, you cannot unless the medical people for Team USA or the Florida Panthers and the Ottawa Senators demand all of the information, which I don't know. Did they have all of it? And the only reason I asked that question is because of what the Boston Bruins allege and went through with Charlie McAvoy, right? So let's give the benefit of the doubt.
Can I just stop you for 1 second? I think Dominic Coletta was there for Team Canada, and I think he was viewed as Team USA by the as Team US by Team USA as the enemy. So I do think that information was a little hard to come by. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, and if that's the case, then there is going to be a follow-up, and I'm not derailing the question or pinpointing the Ottawa Senators involved in a controversy. I'm not doing that. But let's not forget that the Boston Bruins are filing that grievance. And
they are.
Okay, well, that's what I'm told. Yeah. And it's directed at USA Hockey, and it obviously will involve the Players Association and the National Hockey League. And I think based on conversations that I had in preparation for insider trading on Tuesday, it stems back to a lack of communication and information. The Bruins just didn't know the extent of what was going on with Charlie McAvoy and some of the treatment methods that were being employed and all of that. So that's why I feel like there's a bigger explanation to get back to where, we were with Brady and to an extent, Matthew.
Matthew's general manager was there.
So. Exactly. And, make no mistake, as well, I got to stop myself because what I was going to say is playing and contending for a playoff spot or, hey, pie in the sky Stanley Cup matters the most to Brady Tkachuk as captain of the Ottawa Senators.
Sure,
but then I'm reminded that Brady also said, and his brother Matthew said, that going into that championship final was Matthew said it was bigger than Game 7 of the Stanley Cup. Yeah. So look, when you wrap yourself in the flag like the Tkachuk brothers did, then they're entitled to feel the way that they did. So I don't have a hard answer on whether he should have played or he shouldn't have played. I hope that the Ottawa Senators had the information that they needed to help Brady make that call. And if they did, they were comfortable and he was comfortable going into that game and at least trying. And in his case, he finished and Matthew did not. Yeah. So if I'm Florida and now knowing what we know about Matthew after the fact, you 100% could make the case that Matthew Tkachuk had no business starting that championship final against Canada.
Yeah, and like you say, to me, it's one of those double-edged swords. I mean, if he misses a couple games here, that's fine.
Yeah.
If it becomes weeks, which I don't think it will, just based on watching him skate yesterday, Darren, he didn't look in the 15 or 16 minutes he was on the ice on Tuesday, he didn't look uncomfortable.
Yeah, but it's all based on experience too, right, Bruce? Yeah. And you touched on this. There is value in that as long as you're right. This doesn't turn into, a day-to-day is all of a sudden now 10 days and pushing 2 weeks. So as long as he's playing this week, then the investment in that game and giving Brady the opportunity to win a championship for his country and being a special part of history, that bodes well. Again, for the playoff push that the Ottawa Senators are in, and who knows if they lock down that spot, what happens.
As we speak today, we are 9 days away from the trade deadline. I do believe that Steve Staios has kicked tires on perhaps some forwards at the trade deadline. Do you think they need a top 6 forward? Or does Steve Staios has always said to me, answers have to come from within.
Yeah.
Like even when he was looking for a defenseman, he said, I can go get a defenseman and I can give up a second round pick and it won't be a problem. But I want to see he said, I want to see what Nicholas Mantanpalo does. Well, Nicholas Mantanpalo has moved into the top 6. So I guess what I'm asking about up front is, Do you think those answers have to come from within?
Yeah, I do. And I don't think that Staios has shifted from that position. There wouldn't be a team in the league that wouldn't be intrigued by the idea of updating or upgrading their top six forwards, right? I mean,
Yep.
come on. You're
Yep.
as a general manager, always looking for that. Do I expect that the perfect fit, an opportunity like that is going to present to Staios? No, because I don't think that he's turning over every stone in search of that because of exactly what you just described. You know, we had a long talk about the benefits of Brady Tkachuk experiencing what he did in the uniform for Team USA. Well, you know, going through some of the growing pains or the appreciation of what it takes to lock down that playoff spot in the regular season also matters. And shouldering that load, if you're Brady or you're Tim Stützle, Thomas Chabot, I mean, go down the list of all of these young players. Throw Pinto and Norris,
Drake Batherson, Ridley
all
Gregg. I mean, all of them.
That is the young core, right? So if you're not going to allow them to experience that and go through that experience now, are you sure they're going to be battle tested when it really matters? Maybe a year from now or 2 years from now. Now, in saying that, do I think that Staios would like to add some depth? Sure, he would. You know, again, there wouldn't be many general managers, you know, with the trade deadline looming that aren't having those conversations. But I don't think Ottawa is looking for an upgrade up front. In their top six. I really don't, because they believe what they have is solid, and they want those young pieces to experience what it takes to have success.
Well, and I, you know, I do think that if you kind of look, the guy whose loss I've been hurt by, I think is Nick Cousins.
Yeah.
You know, take some of that sandpaper out of there, and a pain in the ass to play against, quite frankly. You know.
Yeah, and hey, that's a good point by you, because let's keep in mind here of, you know, they got Allmark back before the Four Nations, Perron back, and now you get Nick Cousins back into the mix when he's healthy enough to return. Doesn't that kind of feel like a real nice ad? And I know we overlook those things from
But will he be healthy, Darren? I mean,
don't know. I mean, they're hoping that's the case. They're hoping that's the case, but you know, even if he's close, that's going to be a real nice boost to this team. And that's part of the internal answer. That's not spending assets or prospects or draft picks to acquire a piece that you have within. You do need a little bit of good luck medically to get him healthy to a place where he can be contributing. But if he is, then that's going to feel like a pretty decent trade.
You know, you touched on it earlier, but the Senators had a bad night in the standings. There's been a lot of good nights. There are, I think, Darren, there are 7 teams within 7 points of each other. How is that going to play out at this trade deadline?
It definitely will have influence for sure. And, you know, you can look at the perennial contenders like the Boston Bruins, and we're sitting there scratching our heads going, okay, well, you know, people around the Bruins think that they're going to try and transition on the fly, do what the Los Angeles Kings have done, what the Washington Capitals incredibly have done. I mean, Washington is vying for top spot in the National Hockey League, but does a team like Boston have the core to work with so you can transition and rejig and retool on the fly? And we don't know the answer to that. And, you know, then you look at a team like the Detroit Red Wings, who are in a wild card spot right now. They have a ton of cap space, Bruce. You know, they just moved Ville Husso, created more cap space. What are they going to do with that? You know, is Yzerman going to go out into the market swinging here in the days before next Friday? Is he going to potentially be a broker for a team as a third party to sell some of that cap space? And, you know, I mean, the Columbus Blue Jackets have some intriguing pieces. Chris Drury has been active on the trade front, but there's all kinds of speculation around what the New York Rangers might be and might do. So there are some incredibly enticing storylines with the deadline looming, but you have to have the buyers, and then the buyers need the sellers. And the selling market is more precarious than the buying market, because there wouldn't be many of the contending teams that don't have a want or, in certain cases, a need. The issue is that the sellers haven't fully been exposed yet. And they may not be. They may not be because of where they're sitting in the playoff race.
One last thing before I let you go, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about these two teams because we're in Eastern Canada with Toronto and Montreal. What do you anticipate Toronto and Montreal doing? Montreal is kind of in that, they're within distance, but are they really going to make it? Let's start with them.
Yeah, I'm intrigued again by the Montreal Canadiens, but not dissimilar to the Ottawa Senators. Ottawa is further down the road, but Montreal followed the renovation, the rebuild script, and I don't think that they're going to abandon the chapter that they're in. I don't. Yeah. Now they've got some contracts that they're going to have to consider moving, and that's Armia, and that's Jake Evans. What do they do with Savard? They have some interesting pieces that definitely are in play. But Kent Hughes, isn't eager to add to help the chances of the Montreal Canadiens staying in the playoff hunt. The hockey that they're playing right now is good. It's competitive. We watched that game last night, man. I don't know what the hell is going on with the Carolina Hurricanes, but it is messy coming out of the Four Nations face-off. So I think that, sure, Kent Hughes is going to be active, but, with the reasoning behind some of the contract decisions he has to make, not to alter the plan or make them better now to the end of the regular season. Toronto, Bruce, man, different scenario. There's a strong feeling around this organization that they basically have to go all in. And it's not desperation. It's recognition of where they're at in their window to win. You've got those uncertainty of Mitch Marner. You also have John Tavares, who's a pending unrestricted free agent. Those are hefty contracts. And, there's uncertainty because, they haven't negotiated with either guy. They haven't. And Toronto would love to negotiate with Mitch Marner. Marner's camp just chooses not to and may opt for unrestricted free agency. It may stay Toronto, may not stay in Toronto. But Toronto has the prospect pool, the young pieces, Fraser Minton, Easton Cowan, who's with the London Knights. Benny Danford in the Ontario Hockey League is a real nice player. Nikita Grabenkin in the American Hockey League. Go down the list, so that's why I, among others, continue to talk about their need for a centerman. So you start at the top of the food chain. For me, that's Braden Shen with the St. Louis Blues. So is that package of players, not all of them, but some of them, enough to get Doug Armstrong to bite and move his captain? Well, we're going to find out in the days ahead. And then if it's not Shen, could it be Scott Laughton with Philadelphia? Well, it could be, but Briere and the Flyers need a first-round pick or a prospect or a piece of equal value to that first-round draft pick. And then beyond that, you look at what's Nick Bjugstad, what's going on with Utah. Pierre LeBrun talked about Yanni Gourde is likely playing next week with the Seattle Kraken. So I think Toronto most definitely is going to add a center, and they'd like to add at least a third pair defenseman as well.
One last thing. Mikko Rantanen.
That's a spicy meatball, as our good buddy Noodles, Jamie McLennan, always references. For the life of me, I don't know. You scour the NHL as well as I do, Bruce. I can't find anyone outside of Carolina who isn't confused by the Hurricanes making that trade without any sort of contract certainty around Mikko Rantanen.
I know, yeah.
I mean, I know that the player agent, Andy Scott, was surprised when that deal went down. Mikko Rantanen was surprised when that trade happened. Right? Because they didn't exhaust the negotiation in Colorado. They really, truly didn't. So now, if you're Tom Dundon, more than Eric Tulsky, the GM, because we all know how volatile Dundon is as owner, do you allow an asset like that to walk into free agency? Yeah. And the way Carolina's been floundering of late, I can tell you, and what hands-on ownership is all about, Dundon will be just off the charts right now with how this team is playing. So there are multiple scenarios around Mikko Rantanen, and trade is a possibility, if not a strong possibility. And that seems sketchy when you look at the pieces that they moved to Colorado, because Marty Necas is a hell of a hockey player.
Well, I hope for your sake, all the general managers wait till Friday morning and start making deals about 8:05 a.m. right when you go on the air.
Well, it doesn't matter to me. I just sit there and I've got it all figured out. I just look like this. Anytime they need to go live to the insiders, we're just sitting there like this. No, we're too busy.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, Darren. Darren Dreger of TSN. I'm Bruce Garrioch for Post Media. Thanks for joining us.